Hello everyone, and thank you for joining my session today on trusting your chatbot, the power of people and perception. In today's session, I want to cover a little bit about digital transformation, the technology that powers chatbots, and ultimately the value that I think you can get from thinking about a chatbot at your institution. Now, if you do have any questions about the areas that I'm covering in my session today, then my contact information is on the screen now. And if you do find today's session useful, then please spread the word. I'd love to hear about it on Twitter, and my Twitter username is on the screen as well. So if you do find it useful, I'd love to hear your feedback via Twitter, and let's get the conversation started on there. So let's start moving into the subject here. And first of all, I wanted to talk about digital transformation. Now, to me, this is one of these terms that's been discussed for years and years. And for many colleges, it always felt like it was a long-term idea, something that would be worked on in the next 10 or 15 years. There was no real urgency to move towards it extremely fast. I do know that a lot of colleges have made improvements, but there's still a lot of scope for more improvements to happen. However, as we're all aware, the world changed pretty dramatically this year, and so suddenly new systems and new processes have had to be put in place. And these can be for the purpose of digital learning, but also even just simple things like answering the campus telephone. I know that we've certainly had reports from a variety of our customers that have struggled to just accept calls from students because the systems were really not built for a world where people worked remotely. So there's been a lot of challenges, and of course this has really moved digital transformation up the agenda, which I think is ultimately going to be very positive. However, for a lot of colleges, they're now faced with having to identify and implement a vast array of technologies really to protect themselves from future disruption. And whilst I think that will be painful initially, and I know that implementations of any software always feel painful, but I do feel confident that this move to digital will have lasting benefits for colleges and most importantly for students as well. But what kind of technologies should we be considering within that, particularly when it comes to engaging with students? I think that obviously something like classroom learning is an obvious one that I'm sure people are already looking at. But I think an area that always seems to be underrepresented is actually how we can bring technology in to help those of you in the front line of dealing with students. So whilst there's hundreds of technologies I'm sure you're having to consider as part of this transformation project, in our belief, chatbots should definitely be one that is at the top of the list. Throughout the years that I've worked in higher education, there's always one thing that seems to have brought every conversation together, and for me it's connected small institutions, large institutions, public, private, community colleges, all together with one simple problem that they share. And that's simply that there are not enough hours in the day to do the work. This means that emails build up, and unfortunately targets for the newest student intake, they don't decrease, right? They're always going up. And so for me, I always hear people making comments that it just feels like it never ends, and there's just not enough time, not enough resource, and it's not getting any easier. And I think that obviously at the moment everyone's under potentially more pressure than ever, and I feel like a lot of people are feeling that pain even more than they were before. So if time is something that you feel that you could have, that you want more of, then I think that's why you should investigate having a chatbot. The best thing about chatbots is they can really start to bring those benefits in just a matter of weeks, and really save you hundreds of hours of time. And I'll go into that in a bit more detail in a second. First of all, I just wanted to touch on the technology, and I don't want to go too deep on this, but I do think it's important to talk about it I meet lots of people who are very skeptical about chatbots and their ability to help. And, I think a lot of those experiences that come up are actually things that happened maybe 5 or 10 years ago. A technology was previously implemented, didn't work out. And I understand that, but the technology has just moved on dramatically. It is nothing like what it used to be. And the two technologies that are core to chatbots are machine learning and artificial intelligence. And these two words you're going to hear quite a lot if you're investigating chatbots. And actually, they come up quite a lot in business now as well, because those technologies are being used in a vast array of different business processes. Now, look, I'm not going to go into the detail of how those work technically, because they are complex, but I wanted to try and give you a sense of how they work, something to kind of just base some thinking on. Now, both of these technologies are really there to look for patterns in behavior. So just like our brains learn to walk by stumbling a bunch of times, right? That's the same for these technologies. They begin needing that human reassurance to tell them what's correct and incorrect. But over time, they start to have enough data to make informed decisions of their own based on their past experiences. So over time, they keep enhancing, they keep improving, and just like our brains, they get more and more valuable. As students interact with them, as staff interact with them, they're teaching them new things all of the time. Now, we often talk about chatbots sometimes like a new member of the team. You bring someone into the team, and day one is just difficult for them, right? Because they don't know anything about how the processes work. They need to rely on you to answer a lot of the questions. But as time goes on, they are asking less and less questions as they digest it. So for us, a chatbot works in exactly the same way, and you do not need to get into the specifics of how artificial intelligence or machine learning work. Really, what you've just got to think about is this is something that doesn't have the knowledge to begin with, needs some human reassurance to train it on what is right and wrong, and then eventually can start going beyond that by actually making its own decisions about what it thinks the student's trying to ask for. And that's really where you start to get more and more value as it gets more clever over time. So I also wanted to just bring some perspective about these technologies because they're actually something you've probably interacted with before. So if you use Netflix, for example, then and you get good recommendations, then you're actually interacting with the same technology that's powering chatbots. Because Netflix is using artificial intelligence and machine learning, and they're not just using it to recommend you the next gripping series, but actually what's super interesting is they're using that to actually decide on what series they're going to bring to the platform, what scripts they're going to buy into based on how people are interacting with their content. So that's why it feels like every time Netflix bring out a series, it's like the best thing ever, because they're using that machine learning, artificial intelligence to really spot what it is that we are looking for and then bring that to their platform. And of course, Netflix aren't the only people to use this technology. Numerous other everyday things are being used and enhanced by it. So shopping recommendations, driving, a lot of new cars now are introducing more technology to try and help have a safer environment for driving, music recommendations, and so much more. Now, I want to touch on what I think is important, which is the human element of chatbots, and that always seems like it's at odds with each other, because surely the purpose of a chatbot is to kind of have it automated. Well, in our opinion, for this technology to really work and to give your students the kind of experience that you want them to have, we have to have the human element in it. So in my opinion, you have to be very careful and beware of any chatbot technology that claims to scrape your website and automate everything. We do not believe in that method at all. In our opinion, it has to have that human touch to it. If you just rely on your website, it's going to sound boring. and it's going to be very wordy, as your website is. And also it's probably going to contain a bunch of content that's just not relevant or even out of date. I know lots of college websites are not the most up-to-date pieces of information, and so often that can be a real problem. So instead, what our approach is, and I think this is something for you to think about if chatbots are something you're considering, is to have your team build the chatbot. To us, that's super important because we want your voice and their personality, their way of speaking, to come through in the chatbot. Ultimately, we know that the staff and the front line speaking to students are passionate about what your school does and the prospects that student could have from studying there. You know, it seems like a big shame if all that's lost by just automating it all away, right? So what we do is we really train your team how to build a chatbot, and we're there to hold your hand. And as I mentioned earlier on in the process, one of the great benefits of chatbots is the speed. We can take you from having absolutely nothing to having a fully working chatbot in a week. So this isn't a technology that necessarily is going to take you down some 12-month implementation. If you're under pressure now and you need time now, that's why I think chatbots are something for you to go and look at, because this is a technology that can really start delivering straight away. And a lot of our customers, and I know many of our competitors' customers, see benefits very quickly. You know, they're able to save hundreds and hundreds of hours. So we want to make sure that the personality of your team shines through in the chatbot, and we believe that resonates with students and it draws them in and makes them want to use the chatbot more. So it's really important to think about, when you're building a chatbot, how it's going to feel for students, right? Because they're the ones that are going to be asking it the questions. They're the ones that are going to be interacting with it most. What can you do to make it a little bit more fun, a little bit more interesting, but most of all, a little bit more you, right? Now, once we've got this thing up and running, the next thing to just touch on is how to think about this technology and how it fits into your working day, right? I want to make it super clear, because I know that people can be quite worried about this topic, but chatbots are not there to replace you at all. That's just simply not what the technology is designed to do. Really, the objective of a chatbot is to reduce the repetitive, non-complex questions, the low-value work that you just don't feel like you should be doing. And I know from experience that there's a lot of that goes on in a university. Email inboxes are piling up because there isn't enough hours in the day to answer them. But also when you do go to answer them, it's the same questions over and over. And you know, despite putting all the information on the website, students are still going to go for the easiest route, which is to email or call you, right? So the focus for you when you're building a chatbot, when you're deploying a chatbot, has got to be on, how is this going to assist me and my team? How is this going to save us hours, and what are we going to do to redeploy our time on those high value tasks? One of the areas that we see time and time again chatbots excelling in is those out of hours moments, you know, after everyone goes home or before everyone gets in the morning. Students want to ask questions beyond those normal working hours, right? And so what tends to happen is emails and so on build up overnight, and when you come in the morning, the inbox is filled up again, right? And we know this because the problem is students are at school during the day if they're in the undergrad side of things, or perhaps they're working full time if they're in the graduate side of things. So the reality is, when you're available, students aren't. So they're coming on later in the day, looking at the website, trying to find the information and the answers to their questions and not finding it. And that's what's resulting in these emails. The other thing is, we're just all so much more lazy than we used to be when it comes to finding information. We're not going to trawl the whole website to find it anymore. We're looking for really quick access to information. I think the rise of search engines like Google has really led us to think about very short pieces of terminology, short attention spans. And so if we're having to click around your website looking for things, it's going to drive people away. The great thing about chatbot is you can throw some kind of sentence at it and bang, it knows the answer. And that becomes so useful because you're going to reduce down all of that load that's coming in from those simple questions. So, in our opinion, if your primary goal is to get some more time back, if you can offload some of that low value work that's getting in the way of your primary role, then you're going to have a whole load more time to deploy towards one-to-one complex individual student issues and the other high value work that I'm sure you all do. So I just want to wrap up here a little bit and just recap a little bit on some of the things I'm saying here. What I really wanted this session to be about is just that really easy introduction to where you can find value in chatbots, because I think there's a lot of talk about them, but it's quite difficult to make sense of really where you can benefit from them at times. And so from my perspective, what I wanted to do was really give you that sense of that, if you're looking at the next 12 months and how you're going to deal with the increasing student demands, getting, they want their answers quicker than ever, right? Then a chatbot can help with that. If your email inbox is overflowing with the same questions, chatbot can help with that. If you're running intense marketing campaigns that's driving more and more traffic to the website, more and more questions, the chatbot can help. Really, it's about taking the edge off, an extra pair of hands, an assistant. And if you think that you could benefit from another person helping you answer those student questions, then a chatbot is going to be an amazing resource for you to tap into. And the best thing is it can handle lots of questions all at the same time. Hundreds of students could be all asking a question all in the same minute, and the chatbot has absolutely no problem dealing with that. So my encouragement to you is to go away and have a think about what time you and your team could be saving by taking away some of these low value tasks, and then have a think about what you could be doing with that time to redeploy it in much better ways. And of course, if, like every other school I speak to, it never feels like there's enough hours in the day, that resource is thin, budgets are tight, then again, I think chatbots are an amazing resource for you to tap into to help with all of those challenges. So I hope this session's been useful. It's quite short, and so if you have any questions, or you just like to chat with me about your own circumstances and how a chatbot could fit into that, or perhaps you don't believe in chatbots and you want to have an argument with me, then I'd be happy to have a conversation with you. And regardless of whether it's our technology, we obviously have some chatbot technology, regardless whether it's ours or someone else's. It's always interesting for me to speak to schools, understand the challenges they're facing, and figure out whether a chatbot could help. And if it can't, I'm more than willing to tell you that. So I hope this session was useful. And as I said at the start, if you did find it useful, I'd love it if you could give it some love on Twitter. Again, my Twitter handle is on screen. My email address is on screen as well, and please do not hesitate to send me any questions at all. And if you feel like having a quick chat, 10-minute chat with me would be useful to you, I'm more than happy to set that up with zero expectations. So feel free to reach out to me at any time. And best, stay safe, and I look forward to speaking to you in the future. And thanks again for taking the time to listen to me ramble on about chatbots, and enjoy the rest of EDUCAUSE.